Dacian's men had me backed against the wet stone of the alley wall, and the rain had not let up once since the moment I first heard footsteps behind me that were not my own. "You are still the auction house's property," the taller one said, "until a formal claim is entered. You do not get to simply walk away from that." "I already walked away from considerably worse than you," I said, and it was true. And it was also, I understood even as I said it, not going to be enough on its own to get me out of that alley. Somewhere beyond the wall, I heard a sound that did not belong to any ordinary night, low, furious, closing fast, and understood that whatever happened next, I was not facing it alone after all. Let me tell you how I ended up in that alley, because it started 6 days earlier, on a stage in the rain-soaked square of Hollow Cross, where not a single hand went up for me. I was 23, and I had spent the year before that stage learning exactly what it costs an Omega when the man who was supposed to claim her stands in front of the whole village and says, plainly, that he has changed his mind. It is called the reckoning, in villages like mine, an old custom, half-shamed even by the people who still practiced it, in which an Omega rejected and left unclaimed for a full year is auctioned into a household's indentured service, her labour sold to offset the dishonour her family is assumed to carry for the rejection. I had spent that year working my father's forge to the bone rather than sit idle, waiting for some other man to want me, and it had not mattered in the slightest. The year ended. The auction proceeded exactly as tradition demanded. My own rejection had come from a man named Roswell, a tanner's son I had known since childhood, who had courted me for the better part of a year before standing up at a village gathering and announcing, without warning, that he had changed his mind and intended to court the miller's daughter instead. He had not been cruel about it. Exactly. He had simply been thoughtless, the way men are thoughtless when they have never once had to consider what a public rejection costs the person left standing in front of everyone who witnessed it. My father had not fought the custom on my behalf. He had simply grown quieter around me as the year wore on. As though my unclaimed status were a debt he, too, was somehow expected to pay down through silence. I stood on that stage in the rain, soaked through, my shoes already off because the stage boards were slick enough to break an ankle on, and waited for a hand to rise. None did. I do not fully know why, standing there, I expected it to hurt as much as it did. I had told myself for weeks that I did not care whether anyone bid, that indentured service to a stranger's household could hardly be worse than another year of my own village's pity. I discovered, standing on those wet boards in total silence, that I had been lying to myself rather thoroughly. The auctioneer cleared his throat, some formal phrase about default claim rising to his lips, and I decided, in that exact moment, that I was not going to stand there and listen to him finish it. I picked up my shoes. I walked off that stage, down through the stunned, rain-soaked crowd, and did not look back once, not even when I heard, somewhere behind me, a voice raised in something that might have been protest and might have simply been surprise. I did not know, walking away, that the voice belonged to a king. The rain had not eased at all by then, and my bare feet on the cobblestones had gone numb enough that I barely felt the cold anymore. Only the particular hollow ache of a night that had taken considerably more from me than I had walked into that square expecting to lose. I did not slow down. I did not, at first, even notice the footsteps behind me over the sound of my own blood in my ears. I made it 3 streets before I heard footsteps behind me, unhurried but deliberate, matching my pace exactly, and turned, finally, soaked through, and considerably less composed than I wanted to be, to find a tall man in plain travelling clothes standing several paces back. Rain running freely down a face that looked, more than anything, stricken. "You should not be out here alone," he said. "Not in this weather, not after what just happened on that stage." "I am considerably safer out here alone," I said, than I was standing on that stage waiting to find out which household I would belong to by morning. "I would like to be left to my own company, if it is all the same to you." It is not, actually, all the same to me. Something in his voice cracked slightly, an honesty I did not expect from a stranger. I am King Thorn of Hollowcross. I was seated in that square tonight, fully intending to bid on you, and I did not manage it in time, and I have been trying to work out every step behind you since, how to explain that without it sounding like an excuse. I stopped walking. You intended to bid. My wolf recognized you the moment you were brought onto that stage, he said. I have not felt that particular certainty in over 3 years. I froze instead of raising my hand, and by the time I found my voice, you had already walked off the stage, and the auction had closed with no claim entered. I do not have a satisfying reason for the delay. I only have the truth of it, which is considerably less flattering. I did not know what to do with that confession, standing in the rain with my shoes still in my hand. So I said the only honest thing I had left in me. I do not know how to trust a man's sudden interest after a room full of them just watched me stand unclaimed and said nothing at all. I would not ask you to trust it tonight, he said. I would only ask you to let me walk you somewhere dry and explain myself properly, before either of us catches a fever standing in this street arguing about it. I did not fully believe him. I was also, by then, cold enough that pride alone was not going to get me through the night, and I let him lead me to a modest inn 2 streets over, where the innkeeper's eyes went wide enough at the sight of her king dripping in the doorway that I nearly laughed despite everything. 3 years ago, he told me, that first night, staring at the fire rather than at me, I lost my mate to a fever no healer in this territory could break. I held her through the worst of it and could do nothing but watch. I have not let myself want anything the way my wolf wanted you tonight since the day I buried her, and when the moment finally came to act on it, some part of me that has spent 3 years terrified of loss simply refused to move. That is not a flattering explanation, I said, but it is at least an honest one. I have had considerably more practice at honesty than at courtship, he admitted, something almost rueful in his voice. I do not know how to properly pursue a woman I nearly lost through my own hesitation. I only know I do not intend to hesitate a second time. What was she like, I asked, because it seemed, somehow, the kinder question to ask than anything about myself. Your first mate. Something in his face softened, remembering rather than guarding for once. Steady, she ran this household with a patience I never had, and she was the only person alive who could make me laugh at my own self-seriousness without it landing as an insult. I have spent 3 years turning her into a wound I simply avoid touching. You are the first person who has asked me to remember her as a person instead. Then tell me more, I said, and he did. Quietly, for a long while, the fire burning low between us, and I found myself, without quite deciding to, telling him in turn about the year of pity I had endured in my own village. The particular loneliness of being talked about, rather than talked to. I did not answer him plainly about what any of it meant for the 2 of us, still too raw from the stage and the silence that had led to it, but I found, over the following days, that I did not want to leave Hollowcross nearly as urgently as I had wanted to walk away from that auction. Asmund, Thorn's second, explained to me, gently but plainly, exactly how precarious my situation actually was. The auction house retains legal claim over you until a formal petition is entered and approved by the local magistrate, he said. The king's intent to bid, expressed after the gavel, does not automatically override that claim. We will need to petition properly, which takes time, and I would ask you to be careful in the meantime. The man who runs that auction house, Lord Dacian, is not known for accepting lost income gracefully. I did not fully understand the weight of that warning until Dacian himself sought me out, 4 days later, in the inn's modest common room. He arrived unannounced, dressed with the particular understated wealth of a man who wanted his money noticed without appearing to want it noticed, and the innkeeper's easy manner toward her other guests vanished entirely the moment his name was given at the door. He was smooth in the particular way that makes a threat land harder than open hostility would, expressing polite concern for my welfare. My uncertain legal status, the considerable inconvenience and unresolved claim caused his household's accounts. It would be simplest, he said, if you return to the auction house voluntarily while the king's petition proceeds through proper channels. I can offer considerably more comfortable accommodations than an inn can provide. I have seen how your household treats women it claims comfortable accommodations for, I said, though I had, in truth, only heard rumours, dark ones, about the auction house's back rooms and the women who passed through them and were rarely spoken of again. I will wait here, thank you. Something in his smile went very still. Consider it, regardless, he said, and left without waiting for an answer. I sat with that visit a long while after he left, turning it over the way I might have turned over a coin of foreign make, uncertain what it was actually worth. Something about his careful concern for my welfare had not sat easily beside the rumours I had heard, and I found myself, that evening, considerably more unsettled than the conversation's polite surface should have left me. I found Thorn that same evening and told him plainly what had been suggested to me. He has approached you already, Thorn said, his jaw tightening in a way I had not yet seen from him. I suspected he might, once word of the delayed petition spread. I did not expect it this soon. Should I return, I asked, while the petition proceeds? It would resolve the standoff cleanly enough. He was quiet a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had lost the careful formality he usually wore in front of anyone but me. I do not want you anywhere near that man's household, he said. I have spent 4 days telling myself that wanting you safe is simply guilt over my own hesitation at the auction. I do not believe that any longer. I would like you to stay, because I have not stopped thinking, since the moment you walked off that stage with your shoes still in your hand, that I have never once seen anyone choose their own dignity over comfort that plainly, and I find I am considerably more interested in that woman than in a petition's proper channels. I did not have an answer ready for that, so I said nothing, and let the quiet hold it the way quiet had held most true things between us since the night he first followed me into the rain. If you want to find out whether Sable ever managed to walk fully away from that auction house's claim on her, and what Thorn's wolf did the night it finally mattered most. Stay with me through to the end of this. Follow along so you do not lose the thread of what happens when a king who froze once decides he is done freezing. I began, in the days that followed, quietly asking my own questions about Dacian's auction house, mostly because something about the smoothness of his visit had not settled easily in my mind. It was Asmund, following threads through the local magistrate's records at my urging, who found the detail that finally mattered. Every registered bidder present at my auction, it turned out, had been visited privately in the days beforehand by men in Dacian's employ, each conversation ending by more than one witness's account, with a quiet reminder of debts owed to the auction house, or favours that might be called in, should a bid be raised against Dacian's own private arrangements. My auction had not gone unbid by chance. It had been engineered to go unbid entirely, so that the fallback claim would default directly to the auction house Dacian controlled, a pattern Asmund discovered with growing unease. That matched at least 3 prior reckonings in villages along the same trade route, each one ending with an unclaimed omega, quietly disappearing into Dacian's household and never being seen in public again. I sat with that discovery a long time, understanding, with the particular cold clarity of a fact rearranging everything around it, that I had not simply been unwanted that night. I had been engineered to appear unwanted, deliberately, by a man who profited from exactly that appearance. I thought back to the faces of the men seated in that square, several of whom I had known my whole life, and understood now why more than one of them had looked away from the stage rather than meet my eyes. I had spent a full year believing my own village had simply decided I was not worth claiming. I understood now that at least part of that silence had been bought, quietly, in advance, and the knowledge did not make the humiliation of that stage any easier to carry, only considerably angrier. Something in me that had spent days simply grateful to be somewhere dry and safe stopped being only grateful. I brought the findings to Thorn myself. His face, reading them, went colder than I had yet seen it. He has been harvesting rejected omegas from this entire trade route for years, he said. Hiding behind a custom my own crown has been too slow to formally abolish. And I very nearly handed him another one through my own hesitation. Then let us make certain he does not finish what he started, I said, and felt, saying it, something steadier settling into place where the fear had been. Dathian moved first, formally, once he realised the magistrate's records were being examined too closely for comfort. He filed the auction house's claim over me directly with the Crown's own court, citing the unresolved petition and demanding immediate transfer of custody while the matter was properly adjudicated, a legal manoeuvre, Asmund explained grimly, that would very likely succeed on paper long enough to get me back behind his household's walls before anyone could stop it. Thorn contested it publicly, before the same court, refusing the transfer and demanding the magistrate's records be opened to full review before any custody changed hands. The court session itself was tense enough that I chose not to attend, pacing instead in the inn's small common room while Asmund sent word of each development as it happened. It bought us time. It did not, apparently, buy us safety. Dasean's men found me 3 nights later, in the alley behind the inn, where I had gone alone to fetch water rather than wait on the innkeeper's overworked staff. I had grown, in those days, more confident in the Crown's protection than the situation actually warranted, certain that a man with a claim already contested publicly in court would not risk anything so brazen, while the matter remained unresolved. I understood, the moment a hand closed hard around my arm from behind, exactly how wrong that confidence had been. That is the scene I told you about at the very beginning of this, the wet stone at my back, the taller man's grip, the sound beyond the wall that did not belong to any ordinary night. Thorn's wolf cleared that alley wall in a single motion that sent Dacian's men scattering, and Thorn himself arrived a half-second behind it, hauling the man still gripping my arm away from me with a force that left no question about how close he had come to losing every ounce of composure he still possessed. "You sent men to seize her from an inn's own alley," Thorn said, his voice gone very quiet and very dangerous, "while your claim sits unresolved in my own court. I would very much like every witness gathering here to remember exactly what that tells them about a man who profits from women no one raises a hand for." Asmund arrived moments later with enough of the castle guard to make certain no second attempt followed the first, and it was in front of that gathered crowd, inn staff, alarmed neighbours, and Decian's own retreating men. That Thorn's wolf finally did what it had failed to do on that rain-soaked stage 6 days earlier. It crossed the alley, sat directly at my feet, and lowered its head to the whetstone in front of every witness present, an open, undeniable claim no court record could later dispute or reframe as a technicality. "I froze once," Thorn said. "Quiet now, only for me, though the whole alley could hear it. I am not freezing again." Dacian's auction house was seized under formal Crown order within the week. The magistrate's records made public evidence against every prior reckoning he had quietly engineered, and 3 other women from villages along that same trade route were found in his household's back rooms, frightened but alive, freed at last from a captivity that had gone unquestioned for considerably longer than it should have. Dacian himself was stripped of his holdings and his standing, escorted from Hollow Cross in considerably less comfort than the auction house he had run for years. Thorn found me afterward in the same inn where all the true things between us had begun, holding the plain leather shoes I had carried off that stage rather than let the wet boards take them from me. "I have spent 6 days trying to prove to you that I was not simply a man who hesitated once and regretted it," he said. "I do not think nearly losing you in an alley was the demonstration I had intended. It worked anyway," I said, "though I would ask you not to repeat it. I do not intend to make a habit of it." He looked at the shoes still in my hands, then at me. Something in his face finally losing the last of its grief-worn caution. I do not know how to properly court a woman who walked off an auction stage rather than wait to be chosen. I have spent 6 days trying to work out how to be worth the choosing instead. "You already managed it," I said. "You told me the truth about why you froze, and you have not stopped showing up since. That is the only thing you ever needed to do. When he kissed me, careful and certain, a man who had spent 3 years afraid of exactly this and had finally decided the fear was not going to win, I felt something in my chest, some old defended distance I had built the night no hand rose for me, finally settle. He claimed me before the full court a month later. His hand steady on the old iron circlet as he set it on my head himself, in front of every noble who had heard, by then, exactly how their grieving king had chased an unclaimed Omega through the rain, rather than let his own hesitation cost him twice. Asmund stood near the front of that hall, looking, for the first time in 6 days, entirely unworried. Not every voice in that hall welcomed it easily. One elderly duke asked, pointedly, whether a king ought to build his household around a woman first found unclaimed at a rejected Omega auction. Thorn answered him himself, plainly, before I had even decided whether the question deserved a response at all, that the very custom the Duke referenced had just been proven, publicly, to be a mechanism for trafficking rather than tradition, and that he intended to spend his reign making certain no other woman's worth was ever again measured by a silent room's cowardice. The Duke did not raise the subject again. 6 months later, I stood in that same square where the auction stage had once stood, now cleared and repaved, holding a letter from my father in one hand and the plain leather shoes, resoled and cared for now, in the other. My father's letter asked, carefully, whether it was true that the daughter no one bid on was Queen of Hollowcross now. I wrote back that it was true, and that the reckoning itself had been formally abolished by royal decree before the season's end, so that no other Omega would ever again stand where I once stood, waiting for a hand that might not rise. Asmund had stopped bracing every time Dacian's name came up in court proceedings, mostly, now that the man sat stripped of standing rather than running an auction house. The 3 women found in his household had each been given the Crown's own support in rebuilding whatever life the reckoning had once stolen from them, and I made a point of visiting each of them myself, when I could, because I understood better than most exactly what that particular silence costs a person. And Hollowcross, once a village that had watched me stand unclaimed in the rain without a single hand rising, had quietly become known instead for the Queen, who had simply picked up her shoes and kept walking rather than wait for anyone's permission to matter. My father visited twice in those 6 months, considerably more careful with his words than he had ever been while I lived under his roof. And though I had not forgotten the year of pity I endured with his quiet participation, I found I did not need to hold it against him forever to hold it at all. Thorn never once pushed me toward a reconciliation faster than I wanted to move through it. The same patience he had shown me since the night he first followed me through the rain, and I had come to understand that patience as the truest measure of the man beneath the crown. Thorn's wolf, for its part, had never fully returned to whatever careful restraint had governed it for 3 grieving years. It still crossed rooms without permission whenever it decided I had been out of its sight too long, still settled at my feet during council sessions with a devotion the court had stopped finding remarkable, and I had come to understand that particular lack of restraint not as an embarrassment, but as the truest apology a king's wolf knew how to give for the one night it had failed to move in time. I had taken, in those 6 months, to keeping the square's repaved stones free of any marker or memorial, at my own insistence, so that the place would simply become an ordinary part of the village again, rather than a monument to what had once happened there. Some wounds heal better without a plaque reminding everyone where they occurred. I preferred to let the square belong to market days and children playing, rather than to the night it had once tried to define me by. I turned the worn leather shoes over in my hands and thought about the woman who had stood on that stage 6 months earlier, soaked to the bone, certain of nothing, except that she was not going to wait 1 more second for a room full of silence to decide her worth. She had no idea, that rain-soaked night, that walking away was about to become the exact thing that made a king finally move. She only knew she was done standing still for people who would not choose her. I like to think she would be glad, now that she never looked back. Do you think Thorn would have found his courage eventually, on his own? Or did he need to watch me walk away first to understand exactly what freezing had nearly cost him? Tell me your theory in the comments, and if you want to stay in this rain a little longer, comment the shoes and I will know exactly what you are asking for. Thank you for walking through that storm with me. Wherever you are listening from tonight, welcome to Hollow Cross. Follow along for the next story from this side of the border. There are more kings in these hills learning, sometimes too slowly, that the ones worth chasing are usually the ones who stop waiting to be chosen. And I intend to tell you every one of their stories.